We have a jam-packed agenda for today. I'll just go through it now in 1 minute. I think I'll just cover off a little bit of housekeeping first. It's a 90-minute event, and this will include time for questions and answers at the end. You can submit questions using the Q&A panel, and the Energy Stats team will work on responding to your questions in the background. Key questions will be put to the panel during the Q&A section at the end, and a Q&A document will be published after the event and will be sent out to everybody along with a link to the recording and a link to view the slides. So we have a jam-packed agenda and great lineup of speakers for you today. Jim Shear, SEAI's Head of Data and Insights, will be talking about perspective, urgency and action. He'll be followed by Lee Carroll, Programme Manager of SEAI's Energy Statistics team. Lee will give us some insights into the past, looking at definitive annual data. And Lee will then continue on and examine our present provisional monthly data. We will then delve into projections, energy modelling and projections with Emma Lynch, who is SEAI's Programme Manager for Energy Modelling. Mary Holland, a senior member of SEAI's Stats team, will take us through prices, price trends and supports. And to conclude, SEAI GIS analyst and developer Niall Delaney will present on place, GIS and energy mapping. And then after that, we will have time for Q&A, where you can ask the panel questions on what you have seen today. So with that, I think we are good to go. Without further ado, I will pass you over to Jim Shear. Hi, Jim.
Thanks, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Shear, Head of Data and Insights at SEAI, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our annual report launch of Energy in Ireland. Very happy to say we have a record number of registrations again this year, with over 500 people registering, up from 60 people in 2019. So it's great to see this kind of interest in our annual scorecard on energy and energy-related emissions and renewables targets. The statistics team at SEAI have been collecting data from a broad range of sources over the year, and they've been working almost around the clock in recent weeks, as you might imagine Santa's elves have been, to bring you these outputs and insights today. And they've produced what I think is our most insightful presentation of Ireland's energy data to date. Lots of new visuals over the course of the presentation this morning to keep you interested. I'd like to start just with a very few points of perspective to give context of where we're at now, without revealing all. Since the lifting of COVID restrictions, we today confirm that our energy use and energy-related emissions have now fully rebounded to pre-COVID levels. And despite a very strong legislative package from the EU and now here in Ireland with legally binding carbon budgets and sectoral ceilings, and despite work over the last 2 years to upgrade around 40,000 homes, the addition of almost 40,000 EVs to our roads, and a broad range of other actions across industry, public and commercial sectors, our emissions are on an upward trajectory. According to recent EPA research, Climate Change in the Irish Mind, the vast majority of Irish population is aware, engaged, concerned, and even alarmed about the climate crisis. Yet we haven't yet turned this sentiment into actions that reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions, and energy-related emissions are no exception. An updated climate action plan is expected next week from the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and we anticipate it will be very ambitious, and it will need to be to turn our emissions trends around and ensure we live within our first and second 5-year carbon budgets. We don't have all the answers, but at SEAI, and I know many on this call, are in some way committed to driving and supporting a massive wave of climate action, including a rapid shift away from the fossil fuels that are causing the climate crisis and towards a sustainable island based on renewable energy. And we know our challenge needs all hands on deck, so we're all glad that you could join us here today. We hope you find the data and presentations today engaging, thought-provoking, and even action-inducing. So please engage with us via the Q&A over the course of the session, and we'll cover as many questions as we can while we're going and in the Q&A session at the end. I'm now going to hand you over to our Head of Statistics, Dr. Lee Carroll, for our first presentation today. Thanks, Lee.
That's great, Jim. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction and welcome to everybody on the call. We have a kind of an action-packed agenda today, so I'm going to dive straight in and start speaking about the insights we can learn from SEAI's definitive annual data. So the flagship data product that the stats team generate is the National Energy Balance. It's really the gold standard for energy statistics in Ireland. Amongst other things, it is a key input into the EPA's greenhouse gas inventory and strongly informs how Ireland is progressing against carbon budgets and emission ceilings in different sectors. And just to highlight how important energy emissions are in terms of the national greenhouse gases, essentially all of electricity, transport, residential and commercial emissions are attributable to energy, and a significant fraction of industry emissions are also energy related. So tracking and understanding energy related emissions is key to understanding the total emissions that are occurring in the country. Not only does the balance inform the EPA's greenhouse gas inventory, it's a key basis for Ireland's reporting against binding and non-binding European targets, including the renewable energy shares targets and our energy efficiency directives. So data from the national balance goes into the renewable energy share overall results, the renewable energy share of electricity, transport, heat, and it's also used to determine how efficiently we're using energy for the Energy Efficiency Directive. The National Energy Balance and also the Energy in Ireland report provides different lenses through which we can study Ireland's energy. We can look at the source and transformation of energy, where it's coming from and what it is. We can look at the sector distribution, which tells us who in the economy is using energy. Is it the industry sector, residential, transport, commercial services, etc. Modal analysis in the Energy in Ireland report also gives us great insight into how that energy is being used. Are we using it for electrical processes, for transport, or for the heating and cooling of our homes and industrial processes? So we started to use bubble plots to try and improve the impact of the visualizations and increase the understanding of energy in energy supply in Ireland. This is a quick map of the primary energy supply, and it tells us where and what energy is being used. It allows us to understand where indigenous production, imports and exports exist and how they add together. And what really pops off the page on a plot like this is really just how dependent we are on the import of energy. We import very significant quantities of oil, gas and coal. And when you calculate Ireland's import dependency of energy, we find that we import 80% of the energy we need in 2021, and that's up from 74% in 2020. So we have a very high import dependency, and it's getting higher. Specifically around gas, we import 71% of the gas we use in the country, and that's heading up towards 74% in 2022. 2021 was generally a good year for Indigenous production in Ireland. It was the first year in which our renewable Indigenous production overtook our Indigenous production of gas. And 2021 is the first year in which half of all energy that we produce in Ireland was coming from renewables. So when we sum up all of the different data in that bubble plot, we're able to determine the overall primary energy supply and break it down. So just talking around this donut plot, we see that we had a primary supply of 13,850 KTOE, or 161 terawatts of energy in 2021. 46% of that energy came from oil, 32% from gas, 12% from renewable energy, just under 7% for coal, and peat, non-renewable waste, and interconnection electricity made up 4%. So what that shows us is that 86% of Ireland's primary supply comes from fossil fuels, 86% comes from coal, oil, gas, and peat. And how has that changed from this time last year? So how does the data in 2021 look compared to 2020? Well, what we see is that we have increased our need for oil, mainly as a response to COVID rebounds in the transport sector. We saw a reduction in the amount of renewable energy that we're generating, mainly due to Ireland having a poor wind year in 2021. We had a reduced amount of gas being supplied as well, mainly due to the fact that a number of our gas-fired electrical generator plants had outages in 2021, and that's pushed increases onto our use of coal in the economy in general, and in particular for electricity generation. It also meant that we had higher demand on net electricity imports across the interconnects. And all that kind of comes in total to indicate that the primary supply increased by 3.6% in 2021 over the 2020 value. But of course, primary supply is really only the start of the journey in energy. So in order to match primary supply to final energy demand, SEAI and the Energy Balance and the Energy in Ireland report explains how we transform much of the energy in Ireland before it meets its final consumption, is used by the final user. So this is a nice little map of how different fuel inputs go into our electrical generation system. So we have coal, peat, natural gas going into public thermal plants and combined heat and power. I'm sorry, I think my solar PV and wind icon has fallen off, but they all flow into the electricity. And then it really just changes that. This is an important kind of connecting step between the primary supply and the final energy demand in the country. So if we do a quick zoom in on how our electricity generation looked in 2021, we see that we generated 33.2 terawatt hours of electricity. 46% of that electricity came from gas, 30% from wind. So in total, 3/4 of all electricity in the country is coming from gas and wind. We had not an insubstantial amount of electricity coming from coal. We had net electricity imports through the interconnectors. And 4.4% of our electricity came from oil. Again, we can look to see how this has changed since last year. As I mentioned, last year, 2021 was not a good year for wind energy. So we saw a 15% reduction in the amount of electricity coming from wind. The outages in the gas-fired plants reduced the amount of electricity coming from gas. We saw a reduction also from peat generation, but we saw triplings and quadruplings of the amount of electricity that's due to coal and oil. And again, very substantial increases in the amount of electricity that we were importing through our interconnectors to Northern Ireland. All that summed together drove a 4% increase in electricity generation in the country. The increased use of oil and coal in electricity has increased the carbon intensity of electricity in 2021. So it broke a 4 to 5 year streak in which we were making very significant reductions in the carbon intensity. And we see that in 2020, it had reached a historic low of 309 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour of electricity, and that increased to 348 in 2021. But fortunately, when we start looking at the provisional data from 2022, we see that we're starting to generate more electricity from wind, and we're reducing the use of oil for electricity generation. So we hope that when we do the calculations on the carbon intensity of electricity in 2022, we'll start recovering that positive downward trend going forward. So having looked at the primary supply and one element of the transformation of energy, let's have a look now at the final energy demand in Ireland. This is the energy that reaches the end user. And a bubble plot like this allows us to see what's termed the sectoral breakdown and to understand how energy is being distributed across the different sectors of industry, transport, residential, etc. And you can see that kind of profiled out across the different fuel types. So again, what kind of jumps off the page on a plot like this is really the large amount of energy that is in the transport and residential sector. It essentially makes up 2/3 of all final energy demand in the country. And it's one of the reasons why many of the grants that SEAI offers are around decarbonising transport, driving energy efficiency in homes, and working to decarbonise energy consumption in homes. Another key insight is that 95% of all transport energy in the country is coming from fossil fuels, mainly oil. And also how prevalent oil is in every sector of the economy. So there's considerable oil use obviously in transport and residential, but it exists really in every sector of the economy and really is a significant source of carbon emissions throughout the economy. So looking at Ireland's energy demand in 2021, and again, walking around the donut chart here on the left, transport was accountable for 36% of energy demand. Residential sector amounted to 27%. The industry sector came to 19%, commercial services 11%, public services 4.5%, and agriculture and fisheries 2.2%. So the final energy demand in Ireland in 2021 was 11,480 KTOE, or 133.5 terawatt hours of energy. On the plot on the right-hand side, we can see how things have changed from 2021 to 2020 And a lot of the changes are really what we might expect in an economy that is rebounding from COVID. We see an increase in the sector, in the demand in the transport sector as travel restrictions are relaxed. We're seeing a reduction in energy demand in the residential sector, perhaps as work from home eases and more people are returning to the offices. And we're seeing increased energy demand from industry and commercial services, again, as businesses get back into business after the COVID impacts. And in total, we see an increase of 2% or 2.1% in the final energy demand in 2021. So interestingly, this is something that we can examine. We can leverage our provisional data from 2022 to explore more fully. So again, just trying to put these increases in transport and total final energy demand in perspective. This is maybe a lot to take in one slide, so I'll take it a little bit slowly. On the left-hand side, we have the final energy demand of transport, and on the right-hand side, we have the total final energy demand in Ireland. The yellow bar shows the massive drops we've seen in both transport and total final energy demand in COVID in 2020. And the light kind of parts to the plots on the left-hand side show the historical context. And it really shows just how impactful COVID was to, say, the transport final energy demand. Again, we'd never seen a shock to the system like that. And the definitive annual data shown in the dark bar to the right of each plot shows that there is a kind of a partial recovery in 2021. But when we start leveraging our provisional data to give best estimates for 2022, we see that we expect in 2022 much more significant increases as the economy fully rebounds, as Jim alluded to. So while in the Energy in Ireland report, you can see that the definitive increases in 2021, we really expect to see doubling or tripling of rebounds in 2022, as informed by the best estimates from our provisional data. So looking now at the emissions that come from not only from energy, but of the full economy, let's have a little look at the national greenhouse gas emissions and how they've evolved over the years. So in 2005, Ireland emitted over 70 million tons of CO2, and 64% of that emission came from energy-related emissions. But in 2021, things have changed significantly. What's good for the planet is that Ireland has reduced its emissions by over 10 million tons of CO2 in that period. So we're now emitting just over 61 million tons of CO2. But what's interesting to observe is in that period from 2005 to 2021, agricultural emissions have increased in an absolute sense and in a relative sense. So annual agricultural emissions from 2005 to 2021, there's been a change of an extra 2 million tons of CO2 equivalent. But in the same period, annual emissions from energy-related processes have dropped by nearly 11 million tons. And of course, the national greenhouse gas emissions have never been more important and never been more publicized. So as we move forward to 2030, we have carbon budgets in place. Firstly, we have a binding emission reduction target of 51% by 2030 relative to 2018 levels. That sets the ambition for how much CO2 we need to reduce. We have 3 legally binding carbon budgets, and these give us the timeline for these reductions. They tell us how much CO2 we're allowed to emit in these different periods. And we also have 7 legally binding sectoral emission ceilings. And this informs us to where those savings need to be made. So again, the reduction target sets the ambition, the carbon budget set the timeline, and the sectoral emission ceilings distribute that effort over every sector of the economy. So understanding the carbon budgets and the sectoral emission ceilings can be a little bit tricky. So we've developed this visualization that I hope is useful and I hope that people understand. First in the mix is the 2018 baseline emissions as determined by the EPA. So this is the amount of CO2 in millions of tons that each different sector of the economy was emitting in 2018, and it's the baseline for setting the 2030 targets. The first carbon budget, which runs from 2021 to 2025, determines or dictates how much in total in that 5-year period each sector is allowed to emit, is legally allowed to emit. So for example, from 2021 to 2025, the electricity sector is limited to emitting 40 million tons of CO2. The transport sector is limited to emitting 54 megatons of CO2. And the budget also specifies a non-legally binding indicative emission value for the final year. So basically for electricity, it should reach an annual emission of 6 million tons of CO2 in 2025. But what's critical is in its path from 2021 to 2025, it emit no more than 40 megatons of CO2. And similarly for transport, a total of 54 megatons is permissible in 2021 to 2025. And the indicative emission at the end of that period, 2025, is 10 megatons of CO2 per year. There's also a second profiled sectoral emission ceiling for 2026 to 2030, and that's really the path towards this 51% reduction overall. So if we know how much we're allowed to emit in each 5-year period, and we know what the indicative emission should be at the end of each period, we're able to calculate guideline trajectories. And these guideline trajectories are like a scorecard against which we can view the annual results. And importantly, they tell us if we're on track. And if we are on track, that's all good. But if we're not on track, it gives us an early indication of what we need to do or how much effort is necessary to get us back on track, again, for these legally binding sectoral emission ceilings. So we can drop in the definitive data we have from 2021. So this is the amount of CO2 based on SEAI calculations. And this shows that electricity was on track in 2021. Its result is, agrees or is compatible with the guideline trajectory. And in transport, actually, the result, the transport emissions were below the guideline trajectory because 2021 still had significant COVID impacts in the transport sector, and that resulted in a kind of a deficit or a banked amount of CO2 in 2021. However, when we start dropping in the provisional estimates we've made for 2022, we see that the emissions from the electricity sector are higher than the guideline trajectory would indicate. And again, that the transport sector emissions are more or less still on track within the guideline trajectory. Now, this is kind of key information because, as I said, what's important is that the 5-year total is satisfied. And so this early indication from both electricity and transport allows us to modify the future guideline trajectories and really kind of give that information back into the system that the over emission of electricity in 2022 needs to result in a kind of a more aggressive reduction in the following years. And this is kind of key information that we were able to provide now by leveraging the provisional monthly data to kind of feed that that need back into the system for what changes need to roll down. So the carbon budgets tell us how much we need to reduce our emissions by 2030. But the renewable energy share directives from Europe give us also new targets for 2030 in terms of renewable energy. So in 2020, our renewable energy shares targets and results were defined under the RED I, the Renewable Energy Directive, the first Renewable Energy Directive. But as we move into 2021 and out to 2030, our targets and results are defined under the RED II directive. So this is a new directive. It has new targets, but importantly, it has new rules for how the results are calculated. So RED II has more formal verification of biomass sustainability for large-scale users. and it puts caps on the biofuels, on the countability of biofuels into our renewable energy share of transport. So there are limits on the amount of used cooking oil and tallow that we can count into our biofuel renewable share. And this has an impact not only on the overall renewable energy share value, but also on our renewable energy share in electricity, transport, and heat, the Res E, Res T, and Res H. So let's now have a look at how Ireland is doing in terms of these renewable energy share targets. So in 2020, under RED 1, Ireland had an overall renewable share of 13.6 in 2020. But as we move to 2021, under RED 2, we find that the renewable energy share has reduced to 12.5%. So as SEAI collects the numbers and does the calculation under the new rules of RED 2, we see a reduction in the overall renewable energy share. Out of curiosity, and it is only out of curiosity, we've also run the calculation to see how things would have looked if we were operating under RED 1. And we see that the renewable energy share in 2021 would be 13.6 or 13.6 again in 2021 under the old and no longer applicable RED 1 calculation. So these new rules make us kind of increase the challenge of reaching our renewable energy share targets. So Ireland has a target of 34.1% overall renewable energy share in 2030. And the RED 2 specifies these milestone years. So we have a target for 2030, but the RED 2 directive also introduces milestone years in 2022, 2025, and 2027. And it also calls for us to maintain a baseline of the original 2020 results of maintaining a renewable energy share of 16%. So clearly, we really need to increase the ambition and the rollout of renewable technologies, really at a pace that we haven't yet seen in Ireland to start achieving these overall results. And clearly, we've a huge amount to do to try and make the milestone year of 2022 results. So the overall renewable energy share consists of renewable heat, transport, and electricity. So let's have a look now at these more kind of granular renewable energy share targets and results. So in 2020, Ireland had a 39% renewable energy share in its electricity. And in 2021, under the RED 2 calculation, that's fallen to 36.4%. For two reasons. One is some of the biomass that goes into our renewable electricity generation isn't countable under RED 2 due to the verification and sustainability criteria and programs that are still being rolled out, but also because 2021 was not a great year for renewable energy because of the low wind electricity generation. So Ireland has a renewable energy share of electricity target of 80% under the Climate Action Plan out in 2030. So again, we really need to increase the pace of rollout of onshore wind, offshore wind, and solar PV farms in order to reach and satisfy that ambitious target of 80% in just 9 more years. The largest effect of the RED 1 to RED 2 shift in terms of our renewable energy results is in our renewable energy share of transport. So in 2020, Ireland had 10.1% renewable energy share in transport under the RED 1 definition, but in 2021. This has essentially been due to the limitations in the RED 2 methodology around the accountability of used cooking oils and waste animal fats, which make up a very significant portion of the biofuel that Ireland blends into its road diesel and motor petrol. And it really highlights the urgency and the need to really increase the ambition and the rollout of renewable technologies to close that gap to the 2030 target of 14%. And this will involve us shifting to more advanced biofuels, to increasing the biofuel mix or the blending ratios, and also to more heavily leverage electric vehicles. Everything we can possibly do to try and increase the renewable energy share in transport. So really, what I hope I've tried to convey here is the detail that is necessary to make these calculations on renewable energy share and carbon budgets. They have a legal basis. They have a kind of a monetary cost or an exchequer cost in terms of satisfying targets and results. So it's crucial that the data that SEAI is providing in these annual through its annual data releases is of the highest quality, is reconciled to a high degree, and really takes into account all available data that can be made available to us. But the high quality of that data takes time. So really, it takes us a long time to run the surveys that are necessary to capture the energy supply data, energy transformation data, and energy demand data, and to blend that into this, definitive gold standard energy balance that we release partially in April, partially in September, and which we're summarizing today in this Energy in Ireland event. But really, as we're moving to a world where we're trying to understand and develop policy and react to COVID shocks, price shocks, where we have targets that are only 5 years out in the carbon budgets, and even less when we're looking at renewable energy shares, where there are milestones every 2 to 3 years. We really need to try and balance good data now versus perfect data later. And that's really what we're doing now in SEAI by working to more strongly leverage provisional monthly data to supplement our annual definitive data. So at this point, I had originally intended to hand over to our colleague Cathal to give a short presentation on how we are in fact leveraging our provisional monthly data to synthesize new annual insights. But unfortunately, Cathal can't join us today, so I'm afraid you're stuck with me for another 10 to 12 minutes as I give his presentation. Just give me one moment. So what Cathal was going to show and what I am now going to show is how SEAI is working to leverage the monthly data that's available to us to generate provisional best estimates for annual data to give us that leading edge on being able to respond quickly to energy questions and insights. So SEAI gathers and publishes monthly data on electricity, gas, and oil. So the timelines for this monthly data are naturally much tighter than the annual reporting. So typically, electricity and gas data is available 1 month after the fact, and oil data is available between 1 and 2 months after it's reported, depending on the level of detail that's required. So traditionally, SEAI has used this monthly data to satisfy regulatory compliance, to satisfy international reporting timelines. We haven't traditionally used it to supplement or to synthesize annual data because the sum of 12 monthly data points is not the same as an annual data point. Why not? Really, that the scope of the annual and the monthly surveys is different. They don't capture exactly the same things. And the level of internal checks and cross-agency reconciliations that we can apply to the monthly data isn't as high as we would apply to the annual data. Having said that, the monthly data is very valuable in its own right. It has some strong advantages over annual data. One advantage is its ability to kind of give us insights into the seasonality of energy demand. So this is the annual demand of heating kerosene in Ireland. So when we look at it on an annual level, you can see that it changes from year to year, but it's relatively consistent. But as soon as you start bringing the monthly data in, you can kind of see the natural and intuitive variation that we would expect to see in heating kerosene. So the demand for heating kerosene peaks during the winter months and falls away down to 10, 15% of peak demand in the summer months. So that's information that is not available in the annual data. That's something that we really only get from studying and profiling out the monthly data. So that was an easy example. The pattern there was very, very clear, a wonderful sine wave that we can extrapolate and fit to. But even when the data looks choppy to the eye, there can still be deep insights that we can learn. This is a plot of the monthly electricity generation in terawatt hours from January 2015 out to September 2022. And you can start to see some seasonality here, but like there's an awful lot of chop in the data. But if we apply even very simple averaging techniques, for example, if we average out over all Januaries in the last few years, all Februaries, etc., we can start to see that there is strong seasonal variation in the renewable energy generation, and also a seasonal variation in the non-renewable generation. So even when the data looks a little bit choppy on a month-to-month basis, using some very simple statistical techniques, we're able to pull useful insights on seasonality of supply and demand from the monthly data. Here's another really nice example. This is the monthly profile of jet kerosene deliveries in Ireland. So from January 2016 out to, I guess, July 2019, you can see that this cyclical pattern exists. It's easy to explain. We have peak demand in the summer months as we ourselves go on summer holidays and we bring tourists into Ireland. They're flying in, and so there's the demand for jet kerosene increases. We also have this kind of shoulder around the New Year's and Christmas holidays again as people travel home or travel outside for holidays. But what we can really see here is that things were ticking along nicely up to, say, January 2020, all very, very predictable. And then COVID hit us like a train, or hit jet kerosene demand like a train. We see this, it's radically changed the pattern that we see. It's really suppressed it down to 10% in April 2020 of peak demand. It basically did not recover at all in 2020, partially recovered in 2021. But what we're seeing now is that 2022 essentially looks like any other year. So as Jim has said, from an energy perspective, the COVID rebound is real in 2022. And in many sectors, the energy demand has rebounded to 2018 or 2019 levels. We see similar COVID shocks in our monthly data for motor petrol and road diesel deliveries. So before COVID, we had these general trends. We had a reduction, a general monthly reduction in motor petrol and an increase in road diesel. That was shocked in 2020 and 2021 through COVID impacts. So in April of 2020, where the travel restrictions started to kick in, we saw huge reductions in motor petrol down to, I think it dropped down to 40% of the average monthly value. And again, later in the year, around Christmas and New Year's of December 2020 and January of 2021. And we also saw a small shock from Omicron-related impacts in late 2021 as well. And these are both mirrored in both motor petrol and road diesel. The effects are stronger in motor petrol because that's where private car use tends to focus. Commercial vehicles were less impacted by COVID restrictions than private car use for private transport. And this data really strongly affects the annual totals for 2020 and 2021. And really, I'll speak to this a little bit later, but we get some kind of profound insights from why we are seeing delayed rebound in 2021, and we are going to see much stronger rebound in 2022. And really, it's just around how these impacts of COVID have fallen into different calendar years. Yeah. The monthly data can also tell us about our gas supply. So again, very visually, it shows us the reduction, the month-on-month reduction in gas supply due to the output from the Corrib gas field just slowly falling away. And as the output from that field reduces, our dependency on imported gas increases. So maybe, as I mentioned earlier on, we're about 71% of our gas was imported in 2021, and that's going to go up to about 74% of our gas being imported in 2022. But what's really interesting to see is, although those numbers are high, there have been months, in fact, when the import of gas in Ireland has increased to 91% due to outages or maintenance of the Corrib gas field, and the system can take it. So it's kind of an interesting insight that there can be these shocks or changes that are visible on a monthly basis, but which kind of just get smoothed out when we do the annual data. So again, just another high value of bringing the monthly data into our annual insights. Having said that, and having sung the praises of monthly data, it is important to recognize that monthly data is not the same as definitive annual data. So for example, here, looking at the donut chart that shows us the electricity generated from January to September in 2022, it's important to understand that this monthly profile doesn't include all of the data we would have in our annual surveys. It doesn't include transmission losses. It doesn't include industry auto generators. It doesn't have vision of residential solar PV, and it has incomplete coverage of CHP. It's also important to recognize that when we look from January to September, particularly in electricity, it kind of misses the high wind months of October, November, and December. So you always have to be very, very careful when you're looking at monthly data, and especially monthly data from partial years, just to ensure that it does not, without some extra work, give you that annual insight. But that's really the extra work that I mentioned there is something that SEAI is really, really focusing on now in 2021. We are working to very, very strongly leverage, more strongly than ever, the provisional monthly data to develop and synthesize annual data out to 2022. So really how we're doing that is a little bit technical, so I won't go into huge detail, but it really involves us establishing correlations between the first 9 months of a year to the full 12 months. So these patterns exist in many of our energy demand and supply cycles. We have this kind of butterfly or these wings effect where we either have high demand in the summer months or low demand. So heating is low in the summer months. Heating demand is high in the winter months. Renewable electricity is high in the winter months because of the additional wind. It's low in the summer months because it's calmer. So these patterns exist, we're studying them, and if we are very careful, what it allows us to do is to establish these correlations between different quarters of the year and to use that data to make predictions. So again, using kind of statistical correlations and tricks, we're able to take the Q1, Q2, and Q3 data and make a kind of an extrapolation, a projection of how things will look in Q4 of that year. Now, it's only an extrapolation, it's only ever a best estimate, but it's something we haven't done before, and it allows us to really synthesize and bring our 2022 reporting really up to 2022. So really, like, this is really kind of a great example of how we're doing that. So when we look at the road diesel and also motor petrol, what we find is that in 2020 and 2021, both years had a strong COVID impact. We tend to forget about the impact in 2021 because it was at the beginning of the year. But really what the monthly data shows, and we're able to bring into our extrapolations, is that 2021 was still strongly COVID impacted with respect to transport. And that's why we're only seeing a 6% reduction in our definitive annual data. But as you move to 2022, we basically have no COVID features in road diesel and motor petrol supply and demand. And that really allows us to make this prediction or projection that in 2022, we are going to see an 18% increase in final energy demand from transport. And again, this is something that we don't yet have vision of through our definitive annual data. It is something we are synthesizing from our provisional monthly data. We're strongly confident that it is highly indicative of the trend we will see. And the same is true of our total final energy demand. So I previously looked at transport kind of confined to motor, petrol, and road diesel. When we do similar analysis to all energy demand in the country, electricity, gas, oil, etc., we kind of get a similar results. We see that the increase we are seeing in our definitive data in 2021 of about 2% increase in final energy demand is going to be kind of significantly, we're going to see significantly more of an increase in 2022, up to 6%, again, as the economy is essentially fully rebounding from COVID impacts. And mentally, I suppose, if you were to add up the 2021 and 2022 changes here, you can kind of see that they total the COVID, the negative COVID demand requirement that we saw in 2020. So they kind of are compensating, or we're rebounding to that level. We use the same correlations now to establish the provisional carbon emissions for electricity and transport in 2022. And again, this is highly useful because the carbon budgets are only 5-year cycles. It's critically important that SEAI can develop strong provisional estimates that then can be used to modify the guideline trajectories, inform policymakers what changes are necessary to ensure that the different sectors are going to meet their legally binding targets and sectoral emission ceilings. So really that's what I'm trying to highlight here, is that we have our gold standard energy balance. We have our gold standard annual data, but we're working very strongly this year and next year to supplement that data with synthesized annual data from our provisional monthly estimates to really bring the analysis at the end of 2022, where we are now, to include very strong estimates of how we are doing in 2022, not just reporting how we know we did in 2021, but also bringing a strong insight into how we think we are doing in 2022. And really, this analysis allows us to make these conclusions that in 2022, energy emissions are likely to be up 6%, transport energy is going to be up 18%, and again, we're able to estimate the amount of CO2 from the electricity and transport sections. So in 2022, we expect 10.8 megatons of CO2 from electricity and 11.2 megatons of CO2 from transport. And I guess at this point, having hopefully shown how we can have definitive annual data from the past and strong provisional data into the present, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Emma, who's going to take us on a journey into the future.
Thank you, Lee. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the event today. So my name is Emma Lynch. I head up the energy modeling team at SEAI. And our team is made up of expert modelers across a variety of subjects in energy and data science and statistical modeling approaches. Our focus is on modeling Ireland's future. So Lee has brought you through the first part of this timeline this morning. So you've seen how SEAI's energy statistics team looks at our energy past, where the data is more definitive, as well as the provisional present, where we have some more timely data that can be a good early indicator of seasonality or shocks, but it's not a replacement for the definitive data due to the nature of what's covered versus what's not quite available at that time. So on the SEAI energy modeling team, we combine insights from both of these data sets, as well as many others, and carry that forward to carry forward our understanding of Ireland's potential energy futures. So I've pluralized that there because there's even more uncertainty around the data here. So there's many potential kind of roads that we can take. So for this reason, we have to look at a sort of a range of different scenarios because we're looking to project out to 2030, where we might have a little bit more kind of leading indicator data, and then beyond that, past 2030 out to 2050, we need to use as much information as we have, but there's a lot of uncertainty around that and a lot of challenges that can impact that data. So as you saw in the energy balance timeline, Lee walked you through the full energy balance is available in September. So that on the energy modeling side kicks off an annual process for us in preparing the national energy projections. So much like the energy balance, the national energy projections are a significant piece of work. It requires a significant number of inputs to agree underlying assumptions and also to validate the outputs. So we're in a different part of the policymaking cycle. We're currently in the latter stage of running and validating our projection scenarios to release the national energy projections. So unfortunately, I don't have the latest projections data to share with you this morning, but we'll be releasing the national energy projections data and reporting to kind of continue this this conversation into the view out to the future in early 2023. So watch this space. But what I'd like to do this morning is just provide an overview of kind of the goal of the projections that we produce, some of the inputs which are key to that process, and kind of the tool that we use for that process, and what the outputs can tell us about our energy future. So much like the energy balance on the statistics team, the providing projections data on energy production and use is part of SEAI's mandate. So it's core to our mission to provide useful insights to aid in policymaking in relation to sustainable energy. And our purpose as an energy modeling team is to simulate future energy supply and demand with as much accuracy as possible, as well as to quantify the effects that policies and measures from government have on those future trends. And that ultimately makes our projections data useful in both fulfilling national and international reporting requirements, but also in providing that kind of advanced sight of where there might be gaps and inform some of the policy development that fills those gaps. So our national energy projections that we produce annually form a key input into the EPA's annual greenhouse gas emissions projections reporting to the EU, and the national energy projections also underpin our drafting of the National Energy and Climate Plan. So some of the objectives of the projections. So as we can't know exactly what the future holds with modeling, this is the point where sort of the past and present data comes to a fork in the road. So there are several different approaches that we can take to modeling that can help inform that sort of the likely path or the optimal path. So you've probably heard the aphorism that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And that's, you know, definitely something that we take into account. I kind of think of a statistical model as sort of like a prism where each energy model is kind of its own, you know, different material where we have a given set of inputs and each can provide a different kind of spectrum of insights. And the degree to which they're useful really kind of depends on which question is being asked. So with sort of a simulation approach, you create detailed scenarios that are representative of different pathways and project outcomes from those scenarios through approaches and show a range of possibilities under different conditions. We might also take an optimization approach of having a given objective, like trying to find the least cost pathway, or a target achievement approach where you can specify the outcome and adjust levers in the model to find ways to reach that outcome. So each of these can kind of help in addressing common questions that we have about Ireland's energy future. Some of the key questions I have here that the National Energy Projections seeks to address is sort of what is the anticipated collective impact of all of our current policies and measures from government, as well as ones that have been committed to out to 2030, for instance. And so what impact do those measures have on Ireland's future energy supply and demand? Also, what kind of domestic or international targets we are expected to hit or miss under various conditions, some of which we have more control over and some of which we don't. And then where are there policy gaps and how might we best address them? So to address those questions, we primarily use sort of a simulation approach on the energy modeling team at SEAI, where we build in a picture of what's been committed to and try to get that picture as clear and as granular as possible to be able to understand how that will play out under different conditions, such as different sort of external conditions like prices that might have an impact on different incentives for uptake, and also alternative sets of policies. So policies that have already been implemented and funded versus policies that are being committed to, but maybe in sort of the early stages of fleshing out how those will be implemented. So it's also important then in the energy modeling space, given that there's so many approaches to collaborate across that space with other models that might be focused on addressing different questions and provide kind of alternative lenses and perspectives on some of these key questions where we need everyone at the table to be able to get a full picture of what we're likely to see and what the key challenges are going forward. So some of the key inputs to modeling then, really just thinking about how we ensure that we have a model that's useful and fit for purpose to address these questions. So first off, I think starting from the right place. So, you know, as Lee has gone through this morning, we use the latest data from the statistics team to ensure that the model data that we have picks up right, you know, from where the actuals left off. We also calibrate to select macroeconomic inputs, which are informed by the ESRI's modeling, and to make sure that we're capturing those impacts in the model as well. And then another sort of example of having those appropriate sort of costs or grant rates, other inputs that can impact consumer behavior, or switching between fuels or adopting new technologies. So we use expertise across SEAI and government departments to inform these types of inputs as well, to make sure that we're accounting for things like, for instance, like increased construction costs, as we've seen, and how that influences the uptake of things like measures in retrofit. So the other piece we need to be aware of then is that our assumptions are well grounded in what's feasible. And this is an important question at the moment, and is most critical when it comes to things like technology ramp-up rates, as we're currently being faced with like unprecedented requirements for the rollout of new technologies. We have to make sure that we have the best estimates of what's feasible. So we consider this when we set up our scenarios for the national energy projections. So making sure that the existing measures that we have, as well as the additional measures that we're committed to, that we also evaluate annually when we produce the projections, how feasible the timely implementation of those measures are, and any other issues like supply chain shortages or fluctuations in market demand, just to ensure that our model is adapted appropriately to produce the most robust, useful picture of the future there. And we also need to understand the impact of prices, how this might influence demand for specific technology or incentivize switches to renewable technologies. So to do this, we produce a range of sensitivities, so that, and also separate scenarios with different bundles of policies and measures, so that we have a picture of kind of a range of potential futures, and the drivers behind them, so that we still have useful insights, even if we have an unprecedented shock that causes a big change that we need to be aware of, and our model is still useful for that purpose. And finally, to ensure that we're continuously upgrading our model and feeding in the latest data, using expertise across the organization and partner organizations to make sure that the methodology is robust and readily adaptable to that new information. And also in terms of policy, that we're engaged in kind of the evaluation of existing programs and schemes, and increasing the timely and granular data, and ensure that we have the effectiveness of the measures to ensure that the picture in the model reflects this. So the tool that we use for this process is our National Energy Modeling Framework. So this is a national whole energy economy model. It combines macroeconomic inputs and several integrated sectoral modules to give that picture of what Ireland's future energy supply, demand, and energy-related emissions will look like. So one of the key kind of standout components of this approach is the level of detail that's put into our archetype-based modeling to produce a kind of a detailed picture of the characteristics of different consumers of energy, as well as detailed consumer choice modeling. So reflecting the reality of the choices that consumers are faced with, and when they're making decisions about whether to adopt new technologies or take up measures that are available to them, given the incentives and subject to their own constraints that impact their decision making. So this is influenced as well by behavioral economics expertise in SEAI. And another key component is really the granularity of the policy granularity of the approach. So it's important to capture those measures at the most granular level that we can, so we can actually see how our government policies and measures are likely to perform on the ground, so that we're taking that kind of that bottom-up approach to looking at the future scenarios as well. So that's kind of a very brief overview of what our model does. As far as the applications then, so as we've talked about already so far this morning, there's a lot of challenging targets that we need to try to hit, and we need to be kind of constantly aware of how that landscape is shifting. So one of the things that the model does for us is allowing us to report on sort of the likelihood of achieving those targets, but also to point out where, you know, with some advanced side of any kind of potential gaps that we have there, what that's likely to cost, and also giving us kind of more context on that challenge that we have ahead. So where we have those gaps, or where we have, we look at, for instance, in the different scenarios, the impacts of shocks that we might not otherwise expect. So having that kind of that range of information across the scenarios to evaluate those things, as well as being able to give that context of the modified trajectories as Lee showed earlier, in terms of what's required if we miss a certain target, what's required to get back on track. And also highlighting the sort of, you know, where there's additional policy needs. So if there are new potential pathways, or if there's extensions to existing measures that are needed to realign us with the trajectories that are needed to hit certain targets, we can do that by setting up new scenarios in the model as well. So we've also used the model to look out as far as 2050 with the different net zero pathways with different levels of investment and kind of the speed of technology deployment, as in the National Heat Study. So we also can use our model for more in-depth studies like that. And finally, just as I alluded to at the beginning, there's work currently underway on our national energy projections. So we're in the kind of the latter stages of that process of running the scenarios and validating the outputs there. So the previous projections are available on SEAI's Energy Data Portal, but there will be a new data set as well as some reporting to coming in early 2023. And we also have we'll also kind of extend this conversation that we're having today on energy in Ireland, you know, extend that looking forward to 2030 and beyond. So I'll hand over to Mary to talk about prices.
Great, thanks very much, Emma. So my name is Mary Holland, and I'm one of the senior members of the stats team, and today I'm going to present on energy price trends and supports. So just next page. So what we've seen this year is unprecedented increases for energy prices at home and abroad. Now, we've also seen unprecedented supports from the government. For households, we've seen there was a cut in the VAT on electricity and gas bills from 13.5% to 9%, and that was put in place last May, and it is due to continue until next spring. We've also had a €200 credit applied to our electricity bills. The first payment was last spring, and the most recent payment is this winter, and there will be further €200 credits on our household electricity bills next year. For businesses, Revenue are implementing the Temporary Business Energy Support Scheme, and this is where qualifying businesses can claim up to 40% of the increase in their electricity or gas bills, to a limit of €10,000 per month, and they can claim where their average bill has risen by over 50% compared to 2021. And SEAI were given the responsibility for calculating deemed reference unit prices for new customers. We also have the Ukraine Enterprise Crisis Scheme, where 200 million is targeted and includes a strand of 2 million in grant aid for energy intensive companies, the large energy users that were impacted by the increases in gas and electricity costs. And we've also seen supports for other fuels, including reduction in excise duty on petrol and diesel, which was put in place last March and will continue again into next year, and also a reduction on the excise and marked gas oil. So what's causing these high prices. So let's have a look at some global energy prices. So this graph tracks the nominal crude oil prices from 2007, and you can see historically the volatility in this price. You can see the high price over this period, the peak in July 2008 when the price reached $144 a barrel. And more recently, you can see the effects of COVID in April 2020 when the price fell to as low as $9 a barrel. But they recovered quickly after that, and you can see throughout 2021, and then the dramatic increases in 2022 after the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and it peaked. Crude oil prices peaked at $133 a barrel in March of this year. The price has fallen since and was around $80 a barrel by the end of November. So these recent high prices aren't helping, but I mean, they're not unprecedented for crude oil. So next have a look at wholesale gas prices to see the trend here, and this data is sourced from the National Grid in the UK, and it is a daily average of all gas traded in the UK. And you can see there in 2019, that spike that actually coincided with the Beast from the East cold weather event. And prices, you can see in 2021, they were climbing, and most recently, after the effect of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, you can see they're been extremely volatile, and price peaked this year so far at 23-cent kilowatt hour in August of this year, and they dropped after that, but they've been increasing again recently, and it was around 13-cent a kilowatt hour at the beginning of December. Now, we use natural gas to heat our homes and our businesses and to drive industry processes. And as Lee presented earlier, around 40% of our electricity generation comes from natural gas. And this also has a knock-on effect on electricity prices. So these increases in the prices of gas just make the increases unavoidable for homes and businesses. So here in SEAI, we run a number of price surveys, and some of these are to support international reporting obligations. So twice a year, under an EU regulation on electricity and gas prices, we survey all suppliers for the average price over 6 months for the first half and the second half of the year. These are split into household and non-household prices. We actually collect prices broken down by consumption band from small energy users to large energy users. This allows us to compare to our European counterparts. And also once a year, we collect a detailed price disaggregation. We also collect data for the IEA's publication for their energy prices and taxes publication. So this is a quarterly data collection, and it's a simplified single price for each of the various fuels. And we also have our quarterly fuel cost comparison sheet, which are published on our website. Now, we leverage these surveys into our public outputs to inform policy journalists, researchers, and citizens. So we have price reports, we have summary sheets, comparison tables, price trends on the web, price blogs, and animated videos. So before I move on to some of the recent Irish prices, I just want to clarify that we're talking about energy prices, not unit prices. It's the effective unit price. So it's the cost of the energy delivered divided by the amount of energy delivered. So this is important because it includes standing charges, taxes and levy like the PSO levy, the carbon tax, and it also takes account of credits. For example, the €200 electricity credit was received earlier on this year in our most recent price collection. And this just shows you that standing charges can be a considerable cost and tend to fall disproportionately heavily on low demand households. So now I'm going to have a look at the Irish prices, and this price data I'm going to look at is the prices that we collect for under the EU regulation on electricity and gas prices, and the most recent data we have is for the first half of 2022, which is for January to June 2022. As I mentioned, we collect these prices by consumption band, and what this line here is actually an overall weighted average using the consumption for each band, just to create a single price. And here we see the price increases recently, where in the first half of 2022, electricity price to business, the overall weighted average, increased by 44% over 12 months and actually 64% over 24 months. My next slide just shows this price split out into the various consumption bands, with IA being the small energy users or the small commercial users, up to IF, which are the large energy users. And you can see how prices increased for all bands, and the increases were sharper for the higher consumers, the large energy consumers. This is a similar graph for gas, for natural gas, and this is for business. This is the overall weighted average is the green line, which is the Irish price. And this time we've included the EU weighted average, which we can calculate this based on data published by Eurostat. And you can see the dramatic increase again in the second half of 2022, when the average weighted price to business increased by 99% over 12 months. However, you can see it's actually just below the EU weighted average. And if you look at our report, you can see that Ireland is around mid-table in terms of business gas prices across the EU. Let's move on to electricity prices for households. Now, when it comes to household prices, there is often a seasonal effect, a sawtooth effect, where there tends to be higher consumption in the first half of the year. So the little dots there are the weighted average for each semester, each half of the year, and the green line is smoothed to semester average. And we can see that in the increases in the second half of 2022, and where electricity prices to households went up by 10%. And just to know, this actually includes the €200 rebate. So the increase would have been higher without this rebate. And now we have the same for gas prices. And here again, the little dots are the weighted average for each semester. And the seasonal effect is much more pronounced for gas for households, where 2/3 of consumption is in the first half of the year. And the green line again is smoothing out the 2-semester average. And in the first half of 2022, gas prices to households increased by 36%. So this is just a synopsis of the prices available and from our electricity and gas price survey, but there's a full band breakdown available in our report and on the website, and this can also be downloaded from Eurostat. So just finally, we'll just have a look at this disaggregation of prices, which you collect once a year. And this is where we break the price down into the various costs. So these are 2021 prices. We will be collecting 2022 prices early next year. And this is where each euro spent on your home electricity bill, and where does it go? With the bulk of it going to energy and supply, followed by network costs. And also the other taxes there, the bulk of that is the PSO levy. And this is a similar breakdown for household gas, with the bulk again going to energy supply. And in this case, the other taxes refers to the carbon tax. So that's my final slide. So I'd like to thank you for listening to me today. And now I'm going to pass on to my colleague, Niall, to present on place. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Niall Delaney. I've been part of the energy statistics team in SEAI for a few years now, working as the lead GIS analyst. The launch of the Energy in Ireland report is always something I've watched from the sidelines, but I've always been impressed by the attendance we get each year. So delighted to be able to speak this year about and give a brief overview of some of the spatial work that we've been doing in the team, and then talk about one of the directions that we want to take Irish energy statistics in the future. So Lee has already spoken earlier about how the time dimension is gradually been worked into the Energy in Ireland report by providing not only annual energy statistics, but also provisional quarterly and monthly statistics as well, with the idea being that if people get data more quickly, they're able to act more quickly as well. In a similar manner then, we're also looking at adding the spatial dimension to Irish energy statistics now. So not just providing data at a national level, but also providing it at a regional and community level as well. So at a national level, you're really talking about informing government policy, whereas at the regional level, data will be more useful for planning, say, at the local authority level. And then when you get down to the community level, you're really talking about providing data to people themselves to allow them to take action, say, through a sustainable energy community. But spatial work and GIS is not necessarily new to SEAI. For a number of years now, we've hosted a range of online mapping resources, like our Wind Atlas, which details the locations of all the connected wind farms across the country, along with a measure of their generating capacity. We have maps for bioenergy crop suitability, for geothermal potential. Our heat demand map is one of the outputs of the National Heat Study this year, and that gives a very detailed overview of where exactly Ireland uses most of its heat and in what sectors. We have a map for hydropower stations and hydro potential. And then finally, our BER map details the locations of the million or so building energy rating assessments that have been carried out on the Irish building stock to date. So these maps are all very useful resources, but they are mainly for the visualization of data as it's available. But in the energy statistics team now, we've moved towards actually purposely shaping this type of data to support policy and planning. And in addition, then we're also carrying out a lot of spatial analysis to create entirely new data sets that inform planning. So one example of our data shaping then is by providing energy data that's specific to local authorities. So each local authority is now mandated to draw up their own climate action plans, which will detail mitigation and adaptation measures that they intend to take in their own areas for a coming 5-year period. And so to aid local authorities with this task, SEAI this year launched what we've called the Local Authority Climate Action Plan Dashboard. So the first purpose of this dashboard is to raise awareness that energy-related data is actually available at the local authority level. And within there, we have data on, say, BER ratings, electric vehicle grants, heat demand, and so on. And then secondly, the dashboard is there to provide a resource which will allow local authorities to formulate plans on climate action that are evidence-based. Another important aspect of that dashboard, though, is that it's very heavily engagement focused. So while our statistics team has expertise in energy statistics, we're certainly not experts on local authorities and how they actually work. So rather than just providing data that we have available, our focus here is to tailor the dashboard to what local authorities need, and then align that to what we currently know and what we would be able to find out. And to do that, we do rely heavily on feedback and engagement. In a similar manner, then, we're also providing data at a very granular level for communities. So there's over 600 sustainable energy communities in Ireland at the moment, and we're starting to shape data for them to help them draw up their energy master plans. So an energy master plan is a method for communities to understand their current situation and also their projected destination in relation to energy use. And next year, we'll be working on delivering a new mapping resource, which will allow them to access live SEAI data that's specific to the boundaries of their community. And as I mentioned earlier, we also do a lot of spatial analysis of energy data through which we can create entirely new data sets that inform government policy and planning. So one example of this is analysis carried out using spatial data on heat demand, which is feeding into planning for district heating in Ireland. So district heating is a technology for providing renewable heat to buildings, but it's by no means a new technology. It's already well established in many European countries. For example, in Denmark, where it provides renewable heat to 64% of all households. And Ireland has set out targets in its climate action plan to provide 2.7 terawatt hours of heat per year through district heating by the year 2030. And that equates to about 7.5% of all heat demand in the residential, commercial, and public sectors. So it is quite a sizable chunk. So the question is, how are we going to meet those targets and what areas have the highest potential? So as an example here, we have a map made using some very detailed spatial data on heat demand, which we use to assess district heating potential. So the areas marked in gray here are those that are showing quite a low potential, whereas when you move from to the purple and the red and the orange areas, the potential for district heating seemingly gets higher and higher. But what we've done is combine this data with our knowledge of what type of buildings are in each area, what the type of demand is. For example, is it in the domestic sector or the non-domestic sectors? What kind of fuel has been used in these areas? So is it oil, is it gas, solid fuel? And we've brought all this information together and we've identified now approximately 90 candidate areas around the country. which we believe show good potential for district heating. And so our next steps from here is to start to take a closer look at some of these areas by engaging with local authorities and carrying out more detailed feasibility assessments on the ground. So that's just one example of how we're now creating new data purposely directed at energy policy and targets. And I'll just conclude now by noting how I think that the field of spatial statistics is really starting to take off in Ireland. We've only recently added an additional GIS analyst to our energy statistics team to manage the increasing workload and the increasing number of queries that come in for spatial data. We're also working with Esri Ireland to deliver a new GIS environment in 2020, which we believe will greatly enhance our online mapping resources and also our ability to collaborate with external parties. And there is just also a very notable growing appetite in Ireland for spatial statistics as well, not just in the energy field. For example, the Regional Development Monitor, which is a collaborative project between OSI, AERO, and the 3 regional assemblies, that was launched recently. And it's a very impressive resource that our local authority dashboard has been incorporated into. But I definitely recommend exploring that resource if you're interested in any data related to specific areas of Ireland. So I'll conclude there, and I'll just pass back over now to Jim Shear, who might have some closing remarks and then lead into a Q&A session.
Thanks very much, Niall, and also to Mary, Emma, and Lee for those presentations. We got through a lot of the questions that we received on the chat by direct response, and hopefully everyone can see the questions and the answers there. So we've had to cook up a couple of extras just to fill up the last 5 minutes. We don't have the full 20, but I think you'll agree the presentations were very full, and there was lots to go on there. We'll certainly share all the information we shared in the slides with you separately, and the report is downloadable from the SEAI website as well. Lee, I might start with a question to you, if you could, please. You talked about the recalculation under this new EU Renewable Energy Directive, the RED II. Is there any other changes coming down the track that could impact those initial calculations that you've done?
Yeah, certainly. So really, it's we're in a bit of a state of flux at the moment. So we're currently operating and we're doing the calculations as required under the RED II directive, but there is a RED III directive being kind of discussed and drafted at a European level. And there's also the Repower EU package, which is kind of supplementary or even substitutive for some elements of that. So the targets we've speaking about before, they're kind of like the minimum that would be asked of Ireland. So the renewable energy share target of about 34% under RED II might increase to up to 45%, for example, if the Repower EU plan goes ahead and if the historic profiling of Ireland towards the overall EU target is maintained. So the targets we're citing today are useful, but they're the least of which we will be asked to succeed against.
Got that, Lee. So it sounds like European directives coming down stronger and making our trajectory to target achievement much more difficult as well. Can I ask you, while I have you, in terms of the future of energy statistics, and you talked about the need to bring more timely statistics, what other energy statistics can be accelerated, and where are you heading there?
Yeah, so really we're trying to leverage and sweat every statistical asset we have. So I guess in SEAI and the community in general, we just recognize that the definitive annual data is critically important for satisfying these legal obligations and having this high quality reports. But the ecosystem also needs to know how we're doing in close to real time so that those changes can be fed back. So we're looking to be able to generate, say, a Res-E estimate in near real time, a carbon intensity estimate in near real time, and have deeper and more trust in our current estimates of, say, transport emissions, electricity emissions, built environment, residential and commercial. So we're pretty good at the moment, but we definitely want to strengthen and then publish our methodology so that others in the community can both use and give us this positive feedback. And there really just is this understanding and expectation that SEAI can provide data almost up to the minute, and we're pulling out all the stops to move as quickly as we can in that direction.
That's great. So I guess people online can keep their eye on our website as we continue to roll out improvements to the monthly data.
That's key. So I mean, these end of year kind of event launches are very, very useful, but we really have this ambition of like everything online all the time. So we're looking to like radically improve and enhance the web presence and the web reporting of our statistics, and really to put very intuitive, visually impactful, and easily understandable graphics and dashboards online in a way that we never have done before, just to make the information more available and understandable to whoever needs it.
That's perfect. Mary, I might turn to you on prices. We've had a question in about how the supports from government in terms of cash subsidies to householders might be impacting on ability to pay and those kind of issues.
Thanks, Jim. Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, for the we saw the €200 credit on our electricity bill came in last spring, and when we collected data for the first half of 2022, that credit was included in that data collection. It was reflected in that data collection. So with that credit, we saw an increase of 10% in 12 months. However, without that credit, we estimate the increase would have been closer to 30%. And there have been similar credits applied across the EU. And when we submit the data for the second half of 2022, we will also submit our price disaggregation that I presented on earlier, but they've added, Eurostat have now added a new section where we have to report on this credit as a negative price. So we will see the full disaggregation of the price when we have that data, which will be April next year.
Great, thanks, Mary. So some more analysis coming in that regard as well.
Yeah.
Lee, I might just go back to you. There's been some questions on electrification, and that's clearly one of the key pathways for decarbonising our energy system, with very high targets of up to 80% renewable electricity on our grid for 2030, and then obviously shifting some of that transport and heat demand to that sector. But data centres play a role here too, and add potentially a lot of electricity demand. What are you seeing there? What comments could you make just at a high level on data centers?
Yeah, so the energy balance takes data sources from where we find it, where we can find high quality data. And we were very lucky that the CSO, the Central Statistics Office, published kind of key new insights into electricity demand from data centers this year. The CSO have vision of metered electricity demand, so they can very accurately and precisely measure the electricity demand of data centers. So what we see is that about 4% of energy demand in 2021 came from telecoms and ICT, but data centers and ICT, they make up 16% of all electricity demand. And looking at the CSO numbers in the context of the energy balance, we see that the electricity demand of data centers is about half of the entire residential sector. So the electricity demand from data centers is approximately equivalent to the electricity demand of 1 million homes in 2021. And we saw a substantial increase on going from 2020 to 2021. I think the increase is 32% more electricity demand from data centers in 2021 compared to 2020. So significant increase in relative terms, and a significant fraction of electricity demand in absolute terms.
That's excellent, Lee. Listen, we've come to time, and with apologies on the promise for 20 minutes of Q&A, we'll have to wrap it up a little sooner than we'd hoped. However, we'd encourage you now to make your way to the website and download the report. There's a lot more detail in the report than was presented here today. We tried to pick some of the most topical issues, and I hope we did a good job of that. But if you see anything else in the report you'd like to continue a conversation with us on, please get in touch. I really want to thank everyone who took the time to join us, to listen to us here today. Thanks very much to the SEAI Stats team for all their hard work. And I know they'd love to hear further feedback on the report. So as I said, come to the website and download it. We hope this session was something that you got something out of for your own work. I saw a few questions come in there right at the end, and we will circulate a fuller FAQ in response to the questions that we didn't get to today. So stick with us on seai.ie for updates, and those who participated today will get an email with a little more material just to follow up. Wishing you all a lovely Christmas break, and we look forward to being in touch with you again soon in 2023. Thank you.